is when we start to make those decisions, and we're now making them about major documents, all right? And those documents aren't necessarily our own documents. And so I posed the question of, if we're wanting to get some kind of a confirmation, some kind of a receipt for what may be a very innocuous transaction, for example, a gym membership, all right? And in the scale of importance of things in life, gym membership and power of attorney, gosh, I kind of have to go with a power of attorney as being a more important, more prominent kind of a document in people's lives. Yet we're really conscious about making sure that we have everything ticked off for that gym membership, but we wouldn't do the same with a critical legal document. So that's where I sort of put out that open question to everybody. So I am Clyde Heppner, and I am a Missouri notary public. I do both in-person as well as online notarization. I also do loan signings, and I am the creator of the Integrity Notary Journal. So what I would like to share today, and if you just give me a moment while I talk and click buttons, whoops, and I will add to my screen here so that you can see what I have. Huzzah. And we should now see on screen, it should say, let's journal, why we need a paper ally. Is that correct, everybody? Can you see that? Okay, thanks. Excellent. So, give it focus. There we go. So all the disclaimers up front. This is not legal advice, folks. I'm not an attorney. And this really is information that I have pulled together as a result of my own personal research. And so this really is effectively my journey in creating the Integrity Notary Journal, so that I can provide to you at least the logic behind it, but most importantly, why it's important for us to journal at the end of the day, okay? So as always, follow what your state statutes say. If your state statutes say, like in Texas, that you should not be collecting persons' license number on their IDs, don't do so. If it says that you're required to do so, do so. So whatever that is, make sure that you're following those particular statutes and executive orders that may be in place. But my goal at the end of the day, and I'm very, very transparent about this, is that I want you to become somebody who journals. It's essential for our profession. And my overall argument is that it is our duty. It is an obligation that we have to do so. And as a result, it deserves our due diligence. So let's just basically define, what are we talking about? We all say notary journal, da, 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 da. So really, when we think about a notary journal, one of the things I want to impress upon you, it is really our official record of all of the acts that we perform as a notary public. It is a public record, and it is available for people to request information out of that journal. So we are holding an office in most states. It's a commissioned office, and we are a subject to or servant to the state. And these are the work, this is our work product of the acts that we have performed in our official capacity. Okay, so it's not just, it's not just a list of stuff. It is the actual official recording of all of this information. And so why do we care? And again, always keep thinking about the importance of our documents that we have. And one of the things that we want to make sure of is that notarization is retained in a way that can be accessed that information can be pulled out. And so the recommendation in best practices is that we actually maintain a paper journal that is bound in some form. Some states define it, some states do not, but they will say that it needs to be bound and that it needs to be pre-printed in terms of page numbers that are consecutive. And that begins to then provide a level of assurance that the pages in this bound journal are all the pages that are there, nothing's been added and nothing has been subtracted. And so those are important elements, and that these are then the important documents that we have interacted with and we have performed acts upon. And that we have then at the end of the day, that obligation to ensure our notarizations are valid. And a lot of people think that the valid part of a notarization starts and stops with the notary certificate. And granted, we have lots and lots and lots of trainings and lots of discussions around what's the right wording, does it meet state requirements, what goes in the blanks, do we put when our commission ends, don't we? There are all these discussions around what makes for valid notarization. Well, in addition to those aspects, it is also the journaling that comes into play. And so what I want to impress upon you is thinking of this as an overall ceremony, that it has two important components to that. So one is that actual notarization. So we have now identified this person. We have administered an oath if we needed to. We've signed the document, so we've watched our signer sign, and we've completed our certificate. And the thing is that at that point in time, a lot of people believe that they're finished. And there's that other side of it, which gets to the documentation, the whole recording of the evidence, because this does become the evidence of the notarization. So it's when did it occur, who signed, how were they identified, what were their need details. We have a way of assessing physical presence because they've signed our journal or they've given us a thumbprint. And we have additional information that we've collected and recorded in our journal. So there are those two components to this. And so as you start thinking about it, again, we always think about the one side, but it really is the documentation side that becomes as critical as the actual performing of the notarization onto the document itself. So I thought it might be interesting to pull out some data on how well notaries ascribe to the use of a journal. And so what we can see so far, based on the studies that have been done, we know that roughly a third of all notaries in the United States are required to have a journal. And we know that most of those individuals don't maintain a complete journal. And by that, I'm going to refer to it as the smidges and dabs of journaling. So you're going to notice these people because if you open their journal, they may have a couple of dates written in, they may have a couple of complete notarizations listed in there, and then they'll have several dates that are missing that they had notarizations that they never recorded, or they've only collected part of the information for the notarization. So they may have collected, the date and the time, who signed. They may have put down how they identified the person, and then they may have just said documents or legal documents. And that's all that they've put in, rather than doing a complete entry. So when they continued on, the researchers continued on and began to now estimate what proportion of the notary population are actually journaling. What they're saying is that of those that are required, about 2/3 of those notaries actually neglect to perform their duties when it comes to journaling. So now we have even a smaller portion of that pie of individuals who are journaling. So there are more and more opportunities where evidence is being lost. And so I started to ask questions around, so why are we so complacent about this. You know, and if you start to think about the situations that we go into, you know, every day we go out, we meet with people, we sit down with them across their tables, or we meet with them in cafes. And, you know, for the most part, these are all pretty mundane interactions in the fact of, I believe that people are inherently good, that people are not looking to commit fraud. They're not looking to deceive us. And so if I believe that the majority of the people are like that, then the majority of my interactions, my appointments that I have are all going to be like that, right? There's nothing strange or weird happening. We're just people sitting down at a table, signing documents, and I'm notarizing their signature after I've identified them. So we just sort of go through this la-la land of there's no issues, right? Every day it's sort of la-la, we keep doing it. And there's this weird delay between when somebody calls into question the actual notarization and when that issue is, or that issue is brought forward. So you have this thing as a human being where you've got this huge delay between when the act was performed and when somebody is questioning the act. And so that makes us sort of less rigorous. It doesn't want us to drive to the importance. It's not calling to us as something we need to really pay attention to. And so this is one of those things where we don't really realize there's an issue until way later. And then all of a sudden then we start thinking that we should have done something, but now it's too late. All right. And so that sort of adds to that overall complacency. You can almost keep on with that, and it becomes this learned helplessness. There's no utility. I've already done 5,000 notarizations. You know, it's going to be what it is. And so that adds to it. We also don't hear a lot about notaries being charged. And it's not the case that they aren't being charged, that they aren't being questioned about particular notarizations. It's just that it's not really big news. It's not stuff that really goes out on the news wire unless it's something really dramatic. And then, of course, it's all over Facebook and it's all over everything. But for the most part, we don't hear about them. So we also start to feel like, journaling just takes too much time. There really doesn't seem to be the payoff for it, right? You know, we're pretty conditioned individuals that when we do something, we like to get that benefit for what we've expended. And so if I'm always expending this energy and feel like I'm not getting a payoff for it, it starts to diminish. But I'll say is that we've got the wrong mentality around that. And that we need to be thinking of it more as a profession, that this is part of our responsibility to ensure that full linkage between the notarization that I occurred, as well as the evidence that I'm providing to support that notarization into the future, okay? And there are also people, and I've heard people say this, I've even thought this, I'm good. I don't make mistakes. Nobody's ever called me about my notarizations. I just don't make errors. Well, the fact is, it's not about an error, right? And I'm going to bring up an example here in a second, but anybody can call into question with reasonable sort of evidence or doubt around a notarization. And we will then, as a state commissioned officer, need to provide back evidence to help them understand that notarization. So it's not about errors, guys. That's not the issue, okay? The last thing here is my state doesn't require me to have one. So I don't need one. And I think there's some questions that we want to be asking ourselves around that, and what does that actually mean for us as notaries? So let's start with this. Why are we not? Oh, there we, whoops. Okay, so let's start with this. Here's an example. 3 years ago today, a family is contesting the legitimacy of a power of attorney notarization that you have actually performed. Okay, so you're putting yourself into this situation. The family says dad never signed this POA. He never had a POA. However, the son is actually using a POA that the son says the father signed, and he is now acting on his father's behalf. Okay, so son acting on behalf of a POA that he believes his father has signed. Family says, nope, never signed it, never had one. So it's not about an error here, right? It's about calling into question, did dad actually sign this? So you're contacted because it's your name and on the seal, and you're being asked to validate or invalidate that notarization. So the thing is that the attorneys will begin to ask you questions, and they'll have you look at the document, and they'll ask you questions like, have you ever seen this document before? We believe that you performed this notarization, or you may not have, but your seal appears here, so please take a look at it. You look at it and you validate, that's either my signature or it's not, or that's my seal or it's not. And let's say for purposes of argument here that you're saying, yeah, that's my signature and that's my seal. So then the next question becomes, you're saying, yes, indeed, you did do this. This is your stuff. But the family is saying that this father never signed this. So now the question becomes, what evidence do you have to substantiate that notarization having taken place? So as you begin to go into court, there are a variety of things that happen. So people are going to call up questions around what are best practices in your industry as a notary. We know that best practices are that we will be journaling. So they'll bring forward that notion that, is that not true, that best practices are that you should keep a journal? And we reply back, well, no, our state doesn't really require us to require a journal, so therefore I didn't have a journal. Yes, but best practices are such, okay? But then they'll bring up the fact that, you know, in other areas of this profession, such as loan signing and such, when you actually are becoming certified, you are attesting to the fact that you will maintain a paper journal for all of your signings. There are also signing companies that when you are signing up with them, as part of their terms and conditions, you are actually agreeing to the fact that you will be actually maintaining a journal. So they'll be calling out these things as further ways of suggesting that as the industry goes, that's a best practice. So again, we continue to respond that, yeah, that's true, but it's not required in my state, so therefore I did not. So one of the things to keep in mind here is that just because our state doesn't require the journal, it doesn't mean the state is not saying that journaling is not a good idea. They are not saying that you should not keep a journal. All the state is saying is that it is up to your due diligence as to whether or not you do so and how you do that, all right? So you as the notary need to be fulfilling the role of the office of notary and the duties associated with it, but they are not going to dictate to you the tools by which you have to operate that. So those are important things to be considering, and in particular when you're on trial or you're being called into a courtroom because of activities around a notarization that was done. And so they will begin to ask you questions after all of this then of saying, well, can you identify who the signer was, right? Can you tell us how you identified the signer? And if you say, well, I typically ask for an ID, they will ask you, what ID did this signer use? They'll continue to press so that you actually can either say what ID was used, or you'll have to say, I don't know, but I do normally get a government ID or whatever. the fact is that you can't tell them what kind of ID was used, and you don't have any evidence as to what was used. You also don't have any evidence as to whose name was on the ID. And most importantly, you don't have evidence that the person who signed the document was the same person on the ID. And those are all important elements around creating the evidentiary trail to go with the notarization. So I bring that up because the unfortunate thing is while I have not had to be deposed or appear in court for a notarization, I certainly have appeared in court and been deposed on several lawsuits. And so I know exactly what these feelings are. And I will tell you, there is nothing that I want to do to be part of or be placed onto the stand without having sufficient evidence in my back pocket as to what took place. It is not fun. And I do not mean this by any means in terms of, I certainly hate the idea of fear mongering, and that's not my intent. So I want you to know that. It is just something that I truly believe is part of our duty, and that there are consequences as we go forward if we're not being careful in fulfilling our duties. So what does the law then say when it comes to all this, right? So the law basically states that we don't have to be perfect, which is really good, because I am truly not perfect. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had to call up people after the fact and say, oh, by the way, I believe I made an error on your certificate. Can you do me a favor and look at it and tell me what I wrote for XYZ? So what it does say is that we need to operate with reasonable care. And that we need to create then effectively this habit of due diligence. And by doing so, we are able to then create a pattern of behavior over time, which actually becomes very, very important for us, both from a notary perspective, importance in terms of the profession, as well as the notarizations that we've done, and we'll get into that. So the journal becomes a real critical role in this, because it should actually be guiding and driving that notary to fulfill their duties. It should act at the end of the day as this big prompt, this big aid to walk the notary through that entire notary ceremony. So by consistently documenting our information from notarization to notarization, it begins to show a habit of due diligence on our part, and that we are acting with reasonable care. I don't know if you've ever had the chance of hearing Professor Clausen give a presentation where he talks about the different court cases that he's appeared in. He's one of these great experts on notary law, and is called in several times a year to partake in cases where there are questions regarding a notarization or the behavior of a notary. Other people who will do this as well has been Laura Buer. And so in talking with her and then hearing Clausen's accounts of the process, basically what happens is that once the process begins and you are now going to participate in a court case where a notarization that you performed or has your seal, that there's a body of evidence that begins to be pulled together. And so they start by asking for the initial journal entry that you have. But at the end of the day, what happens is you most likely are going to be requested to provide copies of all of your journals as part of the process. And you're going, but wait a minute, it only involves this one notarization. What the court is requesting is to get a view of you as a professional, because it becomes a he said, she said kind of thing, right? His word, her word, his word, his word. This then becomes a independent way of validating what you're doing as a notary and your behavior. And so it is not uncommon for your journals to be requested, subpoenaed, and then both the court as well, if there is a jury, the jury can also request to see copies of all of your journals. And again, what they're looking for is a pattern of behavior. And so a good journal is going to make sure that you're capturing all of that information. And you want to make sure that you're getting off on all of those critical assessments as part of that process, which includes competency and willingness of your signer, as well as where things took place, when they took place, and all of those important details. So a good journal is going to walk you through. Evidence is extremely strong when you begin to look across a variety of notarizations within the journal. And here's a really, really amazing fact. As of this writing in 2018, okay, so this is not long ago, in all of the cases regarding notaries and their notarizations, there are virtually no cases involving an issue with the notary at the end of the day for those notaries that were keeping detailed and proper notary journals. So again, at the end of the day, maintaining that journal, maintaining all of the information and collecting all of that information for each notarization has this very, very strong correlation in that it's keeping all of that information tied together so that even if a notarization of ours is called into question, which is not uncommon, okay, that we can provide the evidence for that notarization. And then we just go on with life. So in addition to just sort of going on with life as a benefit, a good journal is going to establish that the signer was there. This is one of the big things that happens and is one of the major issues that will get a notary in trouble, of course, is doing a notarization when the person isn't in front of you. So this is the most fundamental of everything. And a good journal is going to capture those details, but it will also capture physical evidence that the person was in front of you. And that physical evidence consists of the signature of your signer. So you're having them sign your journal. And there's also other evidence. So you can collect a thumbprint if you so desire, if your state allows for biometric data to be collected. Some states do not. And then one of the important things to keep in mind here is that once our ceremony is over, the documents have been signed, we've packed up our bags and we've left, all evidence of us having done that notarization is gone. All evidence goes with the signer because they have the certificate, unless we have maintained that information in a journal. Oops. Okay, there we go. Continuing on then with more of these benefits, a good journal is going to help assist in the assessment of your signer's identity, but also the willingness and their mental capacity. So one of the things that, you know, when we're first meeting somebody and we're going in to do that notarization, we do our basic greeting. Hi, how are you? Thank you for contacting me. You know, well, let's sit over here. You may chat a little bit about the weather, or if you're sports fans, you see that they're a sports fan, you may say something, and you're just beginning to sort of set things up. You're also starting to calculate whether or not this person is mentally alert, right? You've chit-chatting then about the document. Do they understand the document that they're going to be signing? Do they know about this document? Were they given the document by this other person who's sitting here and they've never really read the document? All those things you begin to assess as part of that process. And for critical documents, we certainly want to be asking questions of our signer. For example, if it is a power of attorney, we should be asking them, do they know what kind of document it is that they're going to be signing today? And if they're saying, well, I know that it allows them, to make my banking decisions. Great. And do you know who has been named the, attorney in fact, or the person that you're giving rights to in here? And do you agree with that? Just asking them basic question. And then, are you doing this of your own free will? And so we can begin to understand the person's capacity, understanding, as well as willingness to complete the notarization. And so our journal should have places for us to indicate that we've completed these assessments, as well as a large enough notes area for us to write down information regarding all of this. And so those are things that I began to understand when I was trying out new journals myself. I'm not a good writer, all right, meaning that my writing skills are horrible. I used to have great penmanship, but I went to graduate school, and that killed it doing all the note taking, and then going for years and years and years without really writing. I just have really bad penmanship, so I write large, I write sloppily, and working within the confines of a traditional journal, and I mean by that the single line journal, where you're just putting one document on each line, is very restrictive for me, because I end up writing all over on that page on different things that I'm collecting in terms of information, but also data, which we'll get into here in a second. And so a good journal then provides you sufficient space in which to capture all of those notes. On critical documents, I like to identify questions that I may have asked that person, or responses that they may have given to me, just as a memory jog on my part. And so I like to include those in a notes section. And then as we continue on with the journal, there we go. There are also additional benefits. It should remind us to administer that oath, actually, if we need to administer an oath. So one of the things that I realized is that I can have this person in front of me. I have a jurat. I can go ahead and administer that oath to them. But other than the person taking the oath and for me giving the oath, there's really no other evidence around the fact that I gave that oath, right? In a traditional journal. So one of the things that I thought was important was to actually provide a prompt inside of the journal where that signer can actually provide their initials that I did administer an oath to them. So again, now I've got additional evidence beyond the fact that they were present, but they actually did receive an oath from me, which is one of the big issues that Clausen points out, and some other scholars have pointed out, and that is most notaries actually do not administer the oath for a jurat. And the problem with that is if it does go into a situation where we have a notarization being contested and we end up sitting in front of a judge, and if there's any evidence to suggest that we did not administer that oath, then that notarization itself can be called into question, because now all of a sudden they have not affirmed or sworn under penalties of perjury that this information is true. And so with that being the case, then they can begin to, they being the opposing attorneys, can start to create a case around the idea that this is not a correct notarization. This person never took the oath, therefore they are not attesting to the truthfulness of the information and cannot be held accountable to the truthfulness of the information in the document. And that's not unusual to happen. So again, it comes back to us as notaries to ensure as a duty that we are providing evidence of the things that we are doing. So with all of this, I'm sitting at home here in Missouri, and I'm thinking to myself, what? Wait a minute, I'm going to need a book, I tell you. And there is no way that a single line is going to actually simplify my life. This is making it more complicated. And the more I read, the more frustrated I became. Because when I put together the list of what is considered best practices to capture in a journal for every notarization, I just lost it. All right, because I kept thinking there isn't enough time, and these people, when I'm sitting at their table, are going to become really upset with me for the amount of time it's taking me to complete my journal. And so I began to do a layout based on all the information that was requested. And my goal was, I want to make sure that this works as efficiently as possible, but still maximizing the amount of evidence I can capture. Okay, so those are my major goals. So if we look at the information about what's to be journaled, some of this we know off the top of our heads, right? It should be the date that this is occurring, typically the start time. There are some scholars that actually believe we should be including the end time. The reason being for that is to show the amount of time that you actually spent for the ceremony. So let me give you this example. It's a simple POA signing. I say simple, right? So it's a POA signing, one document. We go in, we begin filling out our journal, the start time, we go all the way through, and literally within 20 minutes, we're done, right? So start time, top of the hour, 20 minutes later, I'm done. The reason for that is there's providing some evidence that our ability to provide unauthorized practice of law in that short period of time is minimal of what we can provide. If anybody were to call us out that we gave them all of this guidance and walk them through the documents, spend time reviewing the documents, prepping a document, all of those things which we as notaries do not do, we at least have some evidence to suggest that what they're suggesting happened wasn't feasible in the amount of time that I was with the person. Other things to include will be signing location, just because it's important to have that as, again, evidence of where did this signing actually take place. Was it in the signer's home, in a hotel, at a hospital, a care facility? Do we have a room number? Who else was in that room with us? Again, this all becomes part of the ceremony because they are there. They then participate by virtually being with us in the room at the same time. And they are witnessing what's going on. So I like to document who is there with me. And a lot of times it's going to be very simple things like, if they are witnesses, then I certainly don't document them as additional people because they're going to be added into the journal in appropriate areas. These are literally, my daughter is here with me providing moral support as I sign my estate documents. Those kinds of relationships typically. And then we want to also record what documents we actually notarized. The type of notarization we performed, whether it was an acknowledgement, a jurat, a signature witnessing, an oath, and then all the basics again around the signer's name, their contact information, and then how that signer was identified, and always being mindful of what is or is not allowed for our state. And then again, a place for us to note if an oath was administered, and then places for us to check whether or not we had assessed for the signer's willingness, capacity, as well as their understanding. Again, we're not psychologists. We're not being paid to be psychologists. We are normal individuals out and about in the public. And if this person is saying, yes, indeed, I'm doing this of my own free will, and you're getting the vibe from the room that, yes, indeed, this is all pretty good. The person has a good understanding, or from my perspective, they seem to know what they are signing. Great. It's when my perspective is, they can't even tell me what kind of document this is, or what the document is for, or why they need this document, that they even requested this document. All of those things, if all of those alerts start going off for me, then I start saying, I don't know if they are actually understanding and competent to sign the document. Then, of course, if there's a place for thumbprint, if your state allows for that, that's wonderful biometric data, again, providing evidence. I also believe that it adds a level of authenticity and transparency to the overall ceremony when you're meeting with somebody. Again, remember, these are important documents for them as well. And you know, if they have signed a POA or a last will and testament, and you've got that self-proving affidavit there, man, they want to know that this is legit, right? They want to know that, yeah, when I'm gone, all of my wishes have been outlined. There's no worries about this, right? So I want to make sure that they're confident and comfortable in what I'm doing as well. So I want them to be assured that I am providing collecting as much evidence as possible around this too. And so I think a thumbprint adds to that level of transparency and officialness. And then, of course, a place for the notary fee, as well as then any other pertinent information that may have happened during the session, questions that came up, concerns, just overall things. So these are all the standards and everything that I started to consider when I began to design the Integrity Notary Journal. So I did that. I went through lots of different layouts, lots of frustration. I had the journal then trialed by friends and colleagues, and then we actually put it in a national trial. And I also had experts who train notaries to review the journal and provide input. And after all of that data came back in, the birth of the Integrity Notary Journal was brought forward. And that's what I have for you here today. While I am a proponent of the Integrity Notary Journal, I am a bigger proponent of the fact that everybody should journal. I don't care at the end of the day what journal you use, just journal. It is imperative. It's imperative for you, and it's imperative for our profession. So when you open up the Integrity Notary Journal, you're going to notice that it is not your typical journal. It has both an upper and a lower page. You actually open it and turn it onto its landscape version, and you will see those two elements of the journal. And my point here is that I just want you to understand that there's both this upper page and a lower page, and we are collecting information on both of those. And we're providing a variety of visual elements there for people so that they can be prompted as they're going through their notary ceremony. So let's go into the first page, that upper page. And this is sort of how I walk things through when I'm going to do a notarization. So I will, meet with them. We'll sit down at the table, a little chit chat. I will ask to see a copy of the document or documents that they want to have notarized, as well as then I will collect IDs, and then I will begin to document what information I can in the journal. And so, you know, date and time that we're sitting there, who the signer is, and then how did I identify them? So was it a driver's license, passport, a credible witness? And as we're sitting there, then I will identify what kind of format is this notarization. Is this a paper notarization? Are we talking about electronic like iPen, or are we talking about a RON where I'm actually doing it online? So just as a brief pause here, the reason for the format is that there are different requirements in states when it comes to paper journals. And there are some states that are RON states, but are still requiring that notaries can sort of maintain their paper journal. And again, it becomes a complete log, a complete set of acts that that one notary did. So again, let's think back to the purpose of the journal is it's the list of acts, the formal list of acts that a notary has done. So that they would be paper-based or RON-based or electronic, where we might think of them as a hybrid. We're still in person, but everything is done electronically. It doesn't matter. They are all one set of acts that you're performing, and you maintain one chronological list of all of those acts. Now, if you ever want to have a discussion about why you want to have a paper journal with Ron, I'd be more than willing to have that, and we can talk about that. There are lots of reasons, but I'll just stick to the traditional in-person paper notarization right now. So anyway, checking off the format for that notarization. And then I'm going to go ahead and identify the documents that I have in my journal and what kind of act am I going to be performing on them, and then who is the signer for them, right? So I did it this way because I've had different experiences working with both attorneys or real estate people at the same time at the table, and either they were controlling it or I was controlling it. And one of the things that I wanted to avoid was all of a sudden documents being signed and I didn't know what was being signed by whom. It's not uncommon for attorneys, if you've worked with attorneys in when they've got a stack of documents, for them literally just to pull out the signature pages and slide them around the table. And I have no idea which piece is going with whom. Were there witnesses in there, my certificate, all those things. So what I like to do is to gather all of those, and now all of a sudden I'm in control of the documents and the flow of the paper because I'm getting ready for my journal. So now we continue on, and we're going to go to that second page of the journal. And I'm going to put in here my signing location and any other pertinent information, but I'm going to actually take and turn my journal now to my signers. And I'm going to have them complete for me their address information and their contact information and provide me with a signature. If they ask me about their contact information, I explain that the only thing required, at least in my state, is their address. I would prefer if they could get me additional information should I ever need to reach out to them. That would be excellent. And that I do need to have their signature. So I literally just move the journal, have the first person fill that out, and I go on to the next person. And then we're ready to begin the actual ceremony. So now if I had a situation where I had documents that had the jurat in them, if there were several of them, I may administer the oath at the beginning and remind them for each one that they're signing that is under oath, that this one is under oath. If it's only one, I may just wait until that document. You'll just find your own flow. But once I've administered that oath, I flip the journal back around and I have them provide their initials for me in the area where it says that they actually received an oath. So Once I have finished everything, and assuming that, I'm assuming at this point that they've been deemed competent and understanding, then back on that first page up by the format, you would have seen the willingness and competence checks. I would just go ahead and start to check those, and I may make a notation about a particular comment or statement that gave me evidence or belief that they actually knew what was going on, as just a memory aid. And the other thing here I want to point out is, let's say that one person, let's say that, and the example here, the second signer, Teddy, Teddy doesn't have an ID. All right, so Teddy is going to need a credible witness. And for this example, let's say that this particular state, you only need one credible witness. All right. So again, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to identify the credible witness, and you'll see that as the third person here. So that's Mary. And we're going to go ahead and note that she's a witness, and I'm going to write next to her that she's a credible witness. And I'm going to put in how I identified Mary. And then what you'll see is that right above where Teddy's information is provided, how did I identify Teddy? I identified Teddy based on a credible witness, so I check that, and I put in Mary's name because Mary is Teddy's ID. And so that's how I tie together in the journal the idea of a credible witness as somebody's ID for somebody who needs a credible witness. So next, and then, huzzah, you can find this at Amazon, and any support would be certainly greatly appreciated. But again, any journaling that you do, I would strongly support, and I do appreciate your time, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Clyde. Look, Georgia notaries already have some issues out here in these streets with what we can and cannot do and all this other kind of stuff. But just imagine how much that's compounded when you don't have solid records. And while this may not be the sexy part of the notarization, this is the part that can really make or break your commission, heck, even your freedom, if it comes down to it. So it's really important to keep solid receipts, solid journal notes. I want to open the floor up for any questions as it relates to Mr. Clyde, the journal, maybe the journaling process, maybe some situations that you have run into journaling for your notarial acts. You'd be very surprised. People want to come in and learn the loan signing papers. They want to go direct. They want to do all these big fancy terms that we hear when people enter the industry, but it's these little things, again, that will make or break your business. So the floor is open for anyone that has a question. Please feel free to unmute yourself, or if you want to put it in the chat, I'll pull it from the chat and I'll direct those questions to Mr. Clyde. The floor is open.
Yeah. So actually, Samantha, there's one here from me that's a direct to me from Colleen. I don't know if you see those, but they're saying about, is it possible to shorten the word acknowledgement to act on page 1 so there is more room for the initials? As you know, we have up to 4 signers. So let me share that and walk through to make sure that oh, okay. So Colleen, here's the thing. Want to point out a couple of things. One, each signer, so you'll see here in this example, John, Teddy, and Mary, each have a signing number. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4. There's room for 4 signers on the page. And so if we go down to the compliance agreement, so we see there that they had a document called compliance agreement. It has an acknowledgement, and I have circled signer 1 and 2. That means that signer 1 and 2 signed that document, as opposed to if you go down to the owner's affidavit, you'll see there that that was a jurat, and only signer one, John, signed that document. Okay, so when we're identifying who signs which document, that's how we're doing that there. The initial then is just done one time on page 2. While there may have been multiple documents that had a jurat, this is identifying that I did administer an oath, and they did take the oath. We're just not specifying that it was administered for each time. I did administer it in this group to say, yes, indeed, they did take the oath for these documents. I hope that helps. Does that answer that question?
Hi, Clyde, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for addressing that question. So I have assigners cram their little tiny initials on that little space that we were talking about, where we have the circled 1, 2, 3, and 4. Per, I think it was Laura's training saying it was a good idea to go ahead and have them initial next to each one. So
okay.
that's where I'm coming from of, you know, even having 2 people initialing on, let's say, your compliance agreement area. We've got signers 1 and 2 circled there. So I have both of them sign in that tiny little space. So that's where I didn't know if we could shorten the word acknowledgement, take up some of that space for a longer line, if that makes sense.
I had started there and I had actually done that, but do you know what? California requires the word acknowledgement to be spelled out.
Damn that California.
I tell you. So yes, that's why it is spelled out.
Okay.
And then the other thing for California to be fully compliant, because their Secretary of State wants to know the fee that was charged per document. The line that you see there is a generic line, and that's what I have been recommending for where you place the fee that you would charge for that document. So while the fee box on page 2 is for aggregate amount, or you could break it down, I guess, and put it in the notes, but that's just a quick way to put in there that, yeah, you did this one, and you know, it's a $10 charge here, it's a $20 because there were 2 people on this one. But just want to call that out regarding California. They're the only ones that want that requirement, at least that I'm aware of, say that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. You're welcome.
I don't have any other questions, but I would like to take a quick poll of the audience, and you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to, but do you see where maybe you haven't fully done as much journaling as you needed to? This entire presentation, thank you, Ms. Colleen, for your honesty and for your question, Ms. Sydney. But this is one of the reasons why, you know, this was so important, because again, this is the back end of the business that, you know, a lot of people don't talk about. I see all the dollar signs flashing on the, you know, social media and people showing their checks and all this other kind of stuff. And if you know me, you know, that's not exciting to me. I want to stay out of jail. You know, I want to make sure that I'm still able to do this, because it is an amazing industry. But there are the little things that are going to be so important. And like I said, you don't have to, you know, say that it's been you. But I know when I first started, it was me. I had a journal that I wasn't comfortable with. It was clumsy. I'm sticking this weird piece of paper in it all kind. It just was strange. And so when I had a chance to use the integrity journal, I literally have 4 of them on my bookshelf. It just made it easier. I'm not sure how everyone participates in training, whomever you get your training from. I know Georgia is kind of funky because we don't even get training on journaling. Once you got your commission, it's like, hey, knock yourself out, use your handbook. but nobody even really talks about the journaling piece until something crazy happens. But I would always recommend that, whatever training you do participate in, I think Ms. Colleen mentioned Ms. Laura, just make sure that, they're not teaching you about how to do things quickly, but how to do things effectively. And the effective part of the notarization is the journaling part. Ms. Rainey says, I definitely wasn't journaling properly until I got my integrity journal. Look, I feel you. It became more of a chore than actually a part of the entire process. And I believe signers are appreciative of how thorough a notary is when they whip out this journal. And, it's like, this is a part of the process. And a lot of signers have said to me, wow, I didn't know it was this detailed. Yeah. It's this detailed. Ms. Colleen says, it's a learning curve. It is. It is. And as Georgia hopefully ventures over into Ron territory coming up, we don't know how journaling could possibly change for us.
Yeah.
Any chance of having an option to buy a version that is spiral bound for states that it's allowed in, Mr. Clyde?
I wish I have looked at trying to get it produced in a spiral bound, and I have not had success in doing so. But for people who are who have been tenacious about this, so this is the solution that they have informed me that they've used. So they have gone to like a Kinko's or a FedEx all-purpose print shop, and they've had them cut the spine off and put a spiral on, literally. And that's how they're dealing with it. So I apologize. I wish I could. If I can actually get a printer to work with my distributor of Amazon for all of that, that would make this. The problem is that if I do it, it's so cost expensive that your costs, you don't want to buy it. So I wish I could help you. Okay, wow. Okay, Colleen is saying it's $8 to have it put into a spiral. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's something, like you said, you could look forward to in the future, maybe.
Yes, if I have continued to do so, and I've continued to shop that. And if I find a solution, I will certainly get it out there as soon as possible. I really will, because I too would certainly like that. And so yes, I'm right there with you. I have found that I have now got the publisher, and we now have a hardback cover version of the journal. Because that is one that has been wanted for a long time. So that is now available. So it's both the soft cover and the hard cover. But I understand it's not a spiral.
Gotcha. Thank you for those questions and for the suggestions, Ms. Colleen. Do we have any other specific or maybe personal questions that are tied to your journaling experience? I want to do one other quick activity before we let you go. Any other questions? Okay, she doesn't know I'm about to do this, but I'm about to do it. So I had a chance to meet a new Georgia notary today. Her name is Miss Talisha. Is that how you pronounce that, Miss Talisha? She is just coming to the Georgia Notary Nation. I'm very excited for her. She quickly jumped in to join tonight's session. And I'd just like to ask, ask her to just kind of let us know what she thought about tonight's workshop in connection to her just coming into becoming a notary.
Yeah.
Hi, yes, hi. Again, yes, my name is Talisha. Yes, I just recently started here in Georgia, and you are correct on the pronunciation. Thank you so much. I recently started. So the only thing I'm waiting on right now is pretty much my seal. I'm just waiting, for them to send that to me. The training was definitely very informative tonight. I do apologize. That's my little 3-year-old in the background. But the training was very informative tonight. I learned a lot, especially with the journaling piece, because there's a lot I did not know that you really need to capture and not capturing the information that is really needed. can cause some issues later on if it's ever contested in court and things of that nature. So I definitely appreciate you just being very proactive with me today, giving me the information I needed to order my notary book. Also, giving me the information today about the training as well, so that I can kind of, be learning and going as I go. I still have a long way to go, but I'm definitely, excited about it and ready to get started. And I thank you again for everything that you've done. And the training was awesome tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Talisha. I have Ms. Fears, and I don't want to mispronounce your name, Ms. Dorisa. She has her hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, you said it correctly. I'm piggybacking off of Talisha. I am a new notary, probably 30 days in, so I'm still in training. I just got a book. I did not order the integrity. Now I wish I had. I think I'm just not even going to start. I haven't even done my first signing, or I haven't done anything. I've got all my stamps. I'm waiting on a printer. But I wanted to find out this book that I did get. I got it because it was large print. And it's really hard to, tell what you're ordering on Amazon. So a lot of times you can't see what the pages look like. So I'm going to go back and start with an integrity and not even use this one. I use this one as backup. But my question is, this book only had like one witness. I know they're not specific to each state, but I was just wondering, did anybody know for Georgia, how many signers do you have to have? Because this one only had the space for one. Mm-hmm. And then what would I use if it was more than one, if it was Georgia?
So when it comes to witnesses for Georgia, I know refis usually just only require one witness for Georgia properties. Now, if you're the notary who opts to do properties that are not in Georgia, so the witness requirement is going to vary from state to state. And so you'll just have to look through the instructions that are provided to you through the signing company or the attorney or whoever and find out how many witnesses. But for the Integrity Notary Journal, it does allow for you, all 4 spaces, you can, put a witness if you needed to. But again, it just depends on where the property is located as to how many witnesses you will need for that particular signing. So just be mindful of the states, and they vary, but you usually have instructions about it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments, or anything?
Hey, Dorisha, I need to know about the photo. Your image has a photo, or at least a drawing that you've taken. So can you tell me about it?
It was something that was on Facebook. I went there and I was testing out a picture, and it's just a rendering of the picture, and I just snipped it because I didn't want to pay for a whole picture. I just snipped it and kept it. And everybody's like, who is that? That we're Black, and then they see the white hand. They're like, who is that? So I'm like, I don't know. But I just did that. So just to have something nice. I was testing out a picture and the graphic, and that's what came up.
Well, nice. I like that. It's nice and it's unique, and yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or anything about tonight's presentation? So just know that everyone who registered and attended tonight will get a follow-up email thanking you for joining us, but we'll also provide the links to be able to get a copy of the Integrity Notary Journal, in addition to some how-to videos that Mr. Clyde has put together on how to use the Integrity Notary Journal. This session has been recorded tonight, but only members of the Georgia Notary Network will have access to this in our membership portal. But again, Mr. Clyde has provided some really great links on further instructions on how to use the journal. And I'm sure that he'd be more than willing to field questions from you all if we, provide his contact information and things of that nature. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying, if you have any specific things maybe you want the Georgia Notary Network to focus on as far as workshop offerings, just send us an email or reply to the email that we're going to send out. We're always taking suggestions from the field. You may not be a Georgia Notary member, but you're definitely a part of the great Georgia Notary Nation community. And so we want to hear from you as we move forward. Make sure you sign up for GaNN on the Go, which is our internal email communication newsletter that we send out to all Georgia notaries, or at least those that sign up for it. And so we share information as we get it. We vet it, but we share information as we get it and resources as they are available. I'd like to pass the mic over to our president, Ms. Sydney Jordan, to close us out.
Yes, Clyde, thank you so much for the Integrity Journal training. I have like 3 different journals and they're no good, you know. So I really appreciate your training tonight. And for all who attended, thank you all for attending. If you have any further questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us via email. And I look forward to meeting with you all in March for the members of the Georgia Notary Network.
Thank you again, Clyde, and we will see you all in the network. You guys have a great night.
Okay. Thank you much. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.